Okay, hi, Garnet here. We're working on the Help Right Now section of the Neuro Light Practical Guide for Beginners. So if your pages are lining up, we're on page 15, or thereabouts anyway, depending on your paper size. Technique. What I'm proposing here is a structure that has a reasonable degree of flexibility. So again, these are not rules, these are guidelines. They're ways of giving you a quick access with confidence to structures that typically work quite well, but it doesn't mean that you're bound to them specifically. One of the things that we have to consider is that when a person bumps into the Help Right Now, their neuroplastic capacity, their vitality, their brain fitness, their overall constitutional energy still plays a big role. So when you go about choosing, and you'll see that I've given you a rather extensive menu of possible choices, you have to consider how much the person's vitality plays into this, because obviously if their neuroplastic capacity, right, if their vitality, their brain fitness is at a higher level, then it's much easier to work with the dynamics of the current situation. If it's lower, then you can't expect a real quick response, and also you have to be careful to not push it too much. So Help Right Now still has a relationship to neuroplastic capacity because it does come with a signal demand, and we have to always think about the fact that if this is the capacity and this is the demand, that we want a reasonable relationship between the two. You know, hopefully the capacity is greater than the demand, which makes it quite easy. But if it's in the area where it kind of approximates it, then okay, you know, be there and do it, but don't push it. You know, if you're going to err on the conservative side. We'll talk more about that. And if the capacity is lower and you're coming in with a higher demand, you know, chances are they may not be able to really respond that well. You know, if you were doing, say, physical exercise, a person has a sore back because they did some heavy lifting, and you want to give help right now. They don't have a chronic low back. They just have a good low back that's been irritated by heavy lifting. Well, still, when you come in, let's say you're going to do some massage technique, you have to introduce a level of demand, you know, tissue manipulation and so on, that is still relative to what their body can accept. Because if you come in and you do very deep kneading and elbows and all these kinds of things that some people think they have to do, then actually you may be overshooting their capacity, and their sore back is even worse the next day or two because you bruised it. So keep capacity and demand in mind. Here it says if the person's vitality is lower, there are a few things to do. One is choose sessions, choose compositions that tend to be more in the foundation level than the intermediate or the advanced level. And you'll see it in the menu choices that I offer that that's recognized. So don't think you have total freedom in the brain skills section or even in, you know, other aspects to just shoot whatever is available by concept. Do your best to choose levels in brain skills, foundation, intermediate, or advanced, that you think have a relative probability of being accepted by that person. The second thing is, as you'll see, that you have the chance to run up to 3 compositions in sequence for a Help Right Now session. If the person is of lower vitality, restrict that down to 2 or even 1, or even one session. One composition in the session. I use the word session that when the person comes and whatever you're going to do, you do. Then I try to call the individual compositions the parts and pieces. Okay, so composition and session. And the other thing is, if their vitality is low, you can always dial down the general light intensity on the user interface. So if the person has low vitality, they need help right now, 3 things. 1, work mostly with the foundation, maybe intermediate level compositions. Number 2, do only 1 or maybe 2. Don't try to shoot for all 3 because they're going to max out before you get there. And the third thing is dial down the light intensity. 3 to 7%. Seems like not much, but for some people it's quite enough. And naturally, as always, whenever you're considering light intensity, you have to consider the ambient light in the room at the time. Obviously, brighter ambient light, and you can have your Neuro Light at a higher level. A dark room, lower level. Okay, so that's part of the technique. When you do the technique, I've turned the page here, I happen to be on 16 if you're following. Do your best to appreciate that the rhythm or the timing of the compositions also has an influence. If you stack them right one after the other, then that increases the demand. So even if the person has a good to average level of neuroplastic capacity, by stacking these things one after the other, especially if you do 3, which means 33 minutes of constant signaling, chances are that you overshot the mark and that the integration is going to be low. Keep in mind that these compositions, especially from the brain skills section, what I've called at times the candy store, that these compositions are meant to create a probability state. So they create a probability state, meaning that there is a likelihood or a probability that the person can actually integrate this. Imagine you're in a classroom just listening to a conventional lecture, but you didn't sleep much the night before, and you're fatigued and kind of stressed, and you're in the class, and your mind just kind of gets fogged in and fog out, and you kind of almost drowsy, you almost nod off. Really, what's the probability of you actually experiencing, appreciating, and integrating the lesson that's being given? I'd say that probability is low. So when you're doing Neuro Light, when you're doing sensory light and sound stimulation, signaling the brain, the person needs to have a calm, clear, attentional state. It's not hyper-focused, it's not like you're really trying, just being there for it, paying attention. So the time in between, I say around about 3 minutes. Now, if during this 3-minute time they conk out, if they zone out for any number of reasons, what I would say is during the 3 minutes between compositions, have them open their eyes. Maybe ask them a question. And if you really need to bring them up into an alerted state, have them sit up, take a breath, maybe give them a sip of water, and then lay down for the second composition. It is so important to understand that the Neuro Light experience is not confined to the time of the light and sound signal stimulation. Not at all. Even beforehand, what they bring into it, the attitude, the perspective, the willingness or the resistance that they bring into it, the session itself, and that amazing 1 to 2 hour period after, what I call the grace period, when the system is in a high potentiated state. It's really ripe, it's vulnerable, it's sensitive, it's open-minded. What you do with that, and then knowing also that it continues on 12 to 24 hours. The real evidence, the benefit, okay, you can have the experience subjectively of the state during the light and sound. Of course, believe me, it's there, soak it up. Absolutely. It's wonderful. It may not be that profound. Some of the compositions are not meant to be high excitatory. They're more coaxing and calming and cuddling, where the others are more demanding and climbing and reaching. So those 3 minutes between, if you're doing a series, very important. That's at the beginning of integration time. It's like being served a multi-course meal. As soon as you've finished the soup, it's like bam, the salad's right there, and you have to jam. No, there's timing, there's spacing. Part of that is just, the gustatory appreciation, the enjoying it, but also it's a digestive aid, so that there's a little bit of time that once you've eaten for the digestion to begin before you enter in with the next course of the meal. I'm having a look here to make sure I'm catching the points. Oh, the brain food, the nasal light. it's used an awful lot in brain exercise. It's not really that important in Help Right Now, because the Help Right Now is a short-term schedule of experiences. And of course, if they're of low vitality, it's always going to give them a boost. But I don't really consider the brain food a significant aspect of the Help Right Now because of the short-term transitory nature. Hey, you can't go wrong. It always helps, but it may not be that necessary. I'm looking here just to make sure. Yeah, that pretty much covers it, that this appreciation of the fact that usually you can get away with good effects 1 to 3 sessions, and depending on the circumstance, you can even have more than one session in one day. Try to achieve the most while doing the least. Always try to reach the threshold and let the body take over. You know, don't be, I'm trying to find the word, you know, don't be insecure and think, well, I don't know if it's working, so more is better. You know, I don't know if they really like the food, so I'm going to give them another serving. This goes back to the old days in massage therapy when I would, or body work when I was teaching. I said, you know, if you do a stroke, that doesn't really apply. But anyway, I would say because you do it poorly, doing it poorly many times doesn't make it better. In this case, you can't really do it poorly because it's set. But I used to say, you know, because you give a person a cup of bad coffee, giving them a second cup of bad coffee is not going to suddenly make it good coffee. That's sort of a tangent. Okay, so we're working in the Help Right Now, the commentary video series, the step-by-step for the Neuro Light Practical Guide for Beginners, and we just talked about the technique principles in the Help Right Now approach. Okay, thanks.